Welcome to the latest edition of the On and Up Coaching Book Club podcast. This week I am joined by Beth Moore, Rachel Gaskell, Kim Mooney-Doyle, and Rosanna Ortega-Lopenza. Thank you very much for joining me. This is the fourth in the series on books that at least I believe matter and are worth knowing about. I'm Paul Gaskell. I'm the owner of On and Up Coaching. We've slightly revolved the panel today. But we're going to talk today about David Rock's Your Brain at Work, this book here. And as usual, we're going to get going with kind of some of the highlights about what the book is intended to contribute. And then we'll get into a discussion about what the big ideas were, what our takeaways are, and are there any applications that we can put some of the ideas to going forward. Okay, so I'm quickly going to share, hopefully it's going to play ball. Is that the whole screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, excellent. So as you said, the fourth in the series, and this book sold a lot less copies than some of the others that we've looked at, but it was published originally in 2009, and I think the author is basically kind of his life's work has been built since then on the ideas in the book and applying them to leadership and organizations. He isn't a neuroscientist, which probably helps our understanding, because he's trying to explain like the ideas of literally hundreds of different neuroscience research papers over the last 15 years that help us understand better how our brains work and how we can leverage that knowledge. And I think some critical questions that the book tries to address. And I'm sure we'll explore some of these things. But one thing is why our brains feel so taxed, and ways in which to maximize our mental resources. Why it's so hard to focus, and how better to manage distractions, and then how to maximize your chance of finding insights. We'll talk about how that happens. Essentially, we need to slow our brains down to find those insights as a starting point, and then how to keep cool in any situation so that you can make the best decisions possible. And you've got the full power of your prefrontal cortex in play. And then in later parts of the book, so a lot of that's about individuals. Later parts of the book, he talks about how to collaborate more effectively with others, knowing some of these techniques, and how to be more effective at changing other people's behavior when people do get stressed, overstressed, and emotional. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing that. Great. So I'm gonna start with Beth, because I can see her first. And the question I'll begin with is, what are the ideas that you came across in this book resonated for you the most?
Well, I think the first one was the fact that he says that you should prioritize the more complex tasks in the beginning of the day, because that's when your prefrontal cortex is going to be the freshest. And since it has a limited capacity, that's when you should try and attack those type of problems. And also the idea of reappraisal. So, getting yourself to be more motivated by reappraising the way you look at things.
So the first idea, I love the way he conveys that, actually, in terms of the very small stage and the limited number of actors.
Yeah.
That, kind of, you have this image of anytime you've got like 3 or 4 competing priorities, of just not being able to kind of function properly because the priorities keep kind of overriding each other.
Yes, and having the spotlight on the one that you need to concentrate on.
Yes. Yeah. So Kim, what was your idea that resonated the most?
Hi, thanks for having me. I would say that same idea of the analogy of the stage, and it made both the explanation of the neuroscience and your brain working at work or in various tasks concrete and helpful as a way to then explain to others. thinking about family and students in my life. I also like the idea of how he explains that by understanding our brain, and it can help us understand our experiences. And so then that in itself is liberating, because it can help us take a step back to get kind of a meta understanding of how we're acting in the moment.
Awesome. Yeah. I think one of the reasons why I like this book is I've got a few books written by neuroscientists that I've dabbled in, and I almost get lost in their explanations. Whereas I think he is very good with his kind of narrative about the family, who kind of are in various situations, and then he uses that actors and stage thing in a very kind of clear way. So, Rosanna, what did you make of Your Brain at Work? What ideas resonated with you?
Well, thank you again for having me. It's good to see everyone. Paul, I actually love all the books that you have us reviewing. This one, it was a challenge, and it was very exciting to see. And by David Rock's suggestion that if you understand how your brain works, then you can really maximize your life. I love that. There were a few things that he mentioned about anxiety versus happiness that it spoke to me. I love how he said that anxiety kind of closes your field of view. And if you choose to think and feel happiness, that your field of view expands. So that really spoke to me. It was fascinating to understand the chemicals of dopamines that you get in your brain, and the responses that you get. And one other thing that I take from David Rocks in his book is he put it so clearly in his book, and it's something that it is so simple said, and something that I struggle. And what I mean is the different levels of thinking. He said level 1, level 2, and then level 3. Level 1 is all the little bitty things, the noise that we kind of have around ourselves that takes so much time and effort and concentration out of our daily lives, and it drains us. And the level 2 is the kind of medium task that it requires a little bit of more of activity, but also drains you. And when you actually need your level 3 thinking in order to to be able to solve problems in a high and complex level, by the time that you actually need to use your brain to that capacity, you're exhausted. And it made me thought about my life as a mom. You wake up and you have a goal and your to-do list, but then you have in my case, 3 little people, mommy, I need this. And then you add the husband, mommy, by the time I actually get down to do, lunch or emotional support to one of my kids, I'm exhausted. I'm ready to drink wine at 5 p.m. So, but you can also talk about it, obviously, in the professional setting. Many people complain going to work and having to check the email and having to answer the phone calls, and they get interrupted, somebody pre-COVID, people knocking at your door and interrupting. And by the time you actually need to sit down and think, you're exhausted. So it was really fascinating to me to see how he put it all together so we can understand our brain and therefore make a decision of how we behave. So it was a good suggestion to get to this book.
I'm sure we're going to say more about things like emails and complex tasks, but I thought one of the things that I read this probably 10 years ago, for the first time, and I hadn't looked at it directly in a while. One of the things I'd quite forgotten is that the brain seeks out novelty, and the reason I think he gives is that it's a very valuable thing if you're kind of, you know, if there's kind of wild animals kind of living in your neighborhood and you hear rustle in the trees, then you want the brain to respond to those kind of stimuli. And the problem is, in the world we live in now, with texts and emails and things pinging all the time, that those same distraction, those count as the same kind of distractions that our brain's drawn to because they're kind of novel, which is not very helpful for completing complex tasks. Oh.
Yeah.
Rachel.
I would like to give feedback that I don't want to go after Rosanna again.
Okay.
Just a request.
There's a theme
There is. Guys have tapped into so much. I like the thought of the brain as being a puzzle and how it works and how it relates to each other. So I think that that's incredibly fascinating, much like, you know, back in the 80s when people were labeled as having an IQ and then you were put into a compartment and that was what the expectations were laid to you. And we've learned so much more now about the brain and the development and how it really is a tool. And if we can use it better, you know, the potentials are so far reaching. A couple of things have hit me, and one of them is about the rational brain being overrated, is what he says. And I really thought that it's the rational thinking that problem solves. But when he was talking about how you stumble across insight, it's when you stop thinking that it comes to you. And I find that so fascinating because when I first thought about it, I was like, I don't know if that's true. I've solved a lot of problems, but the truth is I remember there was a really difficult, complex problem and I was having trouble finding a way to articulate it for people at work because there were so many different functions coming to the table, and I needed a way to kind of very simplify it. And the truth is that I abandoned it, went out for a walk, and it was during the walk, it was an epiphany. It just came to me, this is how to describe it. And later that day, I had a meeting with everyone, and I said, let's not try to delve into all of it. Let's talk about holistically what we think is happening. And once we had that discussion, everyone got behind it. And for me, that really came out of insight. It was how to describe it. I also agree about the levels of thinking. You know, all tasks are not created equal. And now I understand why I get a personal enjoyment out of deleting emails. It is definitely, it's something that if I'm having a bad day, all I need to do is go to an Excel spreadsheet or take some emails and delete them. But I find the prefrontal cortex fascinating, being one of the latter parts of the brain that develops its limited capacity, but with the critical role it plays. And understanding it more and more makes me not want to allow my children to drive until they're 25 years old. So yeah, so many fascinating things to think of that have interconnections.
And definitely don't drive after they've answered a bunch of emails. That sounds like...
Yeah, right. Another reason why they shouldn't be texting and driving, because it's level 1 and 3 at the same time. So it's like level 4.
Yes. So if you were thinking kind of forwards, I mean, I think we've kind of scratched the surface of some of the ideas in the book. Say there's a whole segment on how to use this in kind of in a team setting or in a group setting, and then how do you help calm other people down, which I guess we might get to. If you were thinking about one thing that you might want to share with your kids, what might that be?
So did you want me to go first?
Oh, I think Rachel will get upset if she doesn't go first.
Oh, good. I get to go first. Okay, fantastic. I think the thing that I would try to illuminate and bring to the kids is about finding out what's the most important complex thing that you need to accomplish and finding where that fits in the day. For me, for work, I have a lot of different activities to do, but if I don't go to my emails and I go right to the problem and I build a presentation or I put together a complex plan, it's so much easier and so much smoother to do. So I would love to bring that to the kids, especially now that they've got more remote learning. So some of the tasks are quite difficult for them. I'd like them to feel successful. So that's what I would bring.
That's great. I thought it was really interesting as well, where he talked about how much it saps the prefrontal cortex to do prioritization, which kind of is, we'll talk about maybe some ideas that maybe are counterintuitive, but that's one I find counterintuitive, because like everyone's like, oh, let's plan the day out. And by starting the day by planning it out, you're already taking away kind of the valuable energy that you have.
Yeah.
So if we're going in reverse order, I guess Rosanna is next. One thing.
I wanted to say that I'm drinking sweet tea. I'm in North Carolina. It's not wine. It's just sweet tea.
It's 5 o'clock. We're recording this, so it's
There's 5 p.m. somewhere. No, I thought about what David Rock mentioned about, first of all, the social issues are primary. That spoke to me. We're social animals. We have felt the toll during COVID-19. And we realized that we were more social animals than before, you know? I also, it spoke to me that we got emotions backwards, and in order to, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would like to teach my, which was part of the question on, I need to be able to, as a mom, focus on their social component, how they feel as a whole in their emotions, give them specific times one-on-one, because I cannot keep I have 3 kids for those who don't know. And I usually tend to treat them equally. 3 boys, 3 the same toys, mommy time, it's share mommy time. And I realized going through this book that it's important to give them their social time with me. Therefore, they can learn how to emotional regulate themselves. And if they have that, and if I can offer that, then they'll be able to be more successful, because they will be able to get into more complex tasks easily or better. So I guess that's kind of where I am as a mother.
One of the things that I find interesting, I like the scarf model that he talks about, where, you know, these are things that can cause us to feel threatened, but he particularly calls out certainty and autonomy. And if I think about, you know, particularly teenagers, then having some sense of autonomy, but having some sense of certainty, or two, in most cases, should give, if you're kind of thinking about that in the context of teenager, it should give them more a sense of emotional control, rather than them feeling they don't have either of those things, especially in the times that we're living in now.
Yeah, and it really stuck to me how David Rocks speak about the bad stays longer with you, it's longer lasting, and it's deeper. And the good, it's really short lasting. And I felt that's unfair, you know? Like, I give my kid an ice cream and we have a great moment that maybe lasts a minute. And if my kids did something wrong and I'm reprimanding them, that's gonna stay with them longer than the great time that we have having a conversation, eating ice cream. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to where I want to focus as a parent. And professionally speaking, it's true. And it was very interesting how he made a connection on, you know, how you feel working in your team. And if you have a negative feeling, I can't remember the word, but like your tuition, if you have a kind of weird feeling, to retrain your brain to make it something positive, so you can change the outcome somehow. So it's interesting to me, you know, like, how can I train my kids to think positive, you know, make things better, think about half full cup of water instead of half empty. my husband usually sees the cup half full, and I usually see it half empty. So to kind of rewire your brain, it's interesting as a parent and as a professional too.
So Kim, what are you sharing with your kids?
Well, one of the things that he said, he was talking about the workplace, but it resonated with me as a parent because it made me realize that, gosh, sometimes I'm a crummy manager. When he talked about how managers and what they say backfires and, you know, jacks up the anxiety in the team, and it gets back to that idea of like the status threat. And even though I'm well-intended, when I go in and offer feedback, offer corrections, you know, reprimand, especially with a teenager where that exerting of independence may then be threatened, or that, you know, sharing an opinion to demonstrate a sense of autonomy, you know, gets threatened. It made me step back and realize that, how can I, one, help myself think about the way that I act in the situation, realizing the impact that it has on their, you know, their cognitive state from the emotion that's jacked up. And then two, then helping them learn how to adjust. So, and then using I really like that analogy of the stage, because then I think it's something that can be grasped across developmental stages. Yep. So from my 8-year-old to my 14-year-old, it was concrete.
Nice. Yeah. The one thing I like, and I use this a lot, is kind of doing this sort of what I think he calls metacognition. So you kind of look at how you did something, you reflect back on it, and you try and understand, so maybe the triggers that made you feel kind of like incredibly direct about what you wanted, and giving it a label makes it possible then to stop yourself going, oh right, this is I don't know, we're gonna create a crisis if I go down that path. It's like, so the label is crisis, and you're like, okay, what do I having thought about it ahead of time, what is my plan for approaching this without going down a bad path? So Beth, what
Okay.
you? Yeah.
Well, one piece of information that I found very helpful within my family was when he talked about how physical pain is actually the same centers of the brain as social pain. And he said that, you know, that you can actually take a Tylenol if you have social pain and you will feel less pain. And I thought that was very interesting, that we have that social pain is the same as physical pain. And I think that, you know, also the fact that I can I can incentivize and have my child, you know, more satisfied and do the things that I would like to encourage her to do by not affecting her status, by giving her more certainty in her tasks, by giving her the autonomy, which I would love to give her, because when she has autonomy, then that also makes my life better, and relatedness and fairness. So just by trying to implement those in our family life will, I think, make our family work better.
He does say about the SCARF, that acronym, that some of them are more important to some of us than others. So there'll be some people for whom status is like the thing, and others for whom fairness will be like the thing. So they do all play a part, but there's
right.
So finding the thing, or the two things that are much more likely for your child or your kind of employee
right.
you work with, is quite a powerful thing to be able to do.
But the status, I think, is a little bit more important than I realized within the family structure.
Okay.
So that's something that I was never focusing on.
Terrific. I'm going to just do a couple more things before we're done. One is, was there anything that sort of struck you as like, I'm not sure I believe that in the book? Because all of the books we've looked at so far, I think it's really hard to find something that I wouldn't go along with, but it's often helpful to have a fresh pair of eyes. Anyone have anything that they like? Not, oh, go ahead, Beth.
I actually have been doing some study of Ayurvedic traditions. And I think that when he says that, it's often good to start on the more complex tasks like early in the day, I think that he doesn't think about how people might all be in like different groups, where some people are better at that time of the day, when other people, it's at a different time of the day, maybe like early evening, for example. But I just think that that's a little more complex than we're all, we all are, we all are either night owls or early morning people. And I think that would probably should be studied more.
He was pretty absolute about that, wasn't he? That it's the morning or it's nothing. And you can kind of regenerate with caffeine and things, but yeah.
Right.
I'd be interested to kind of go and investigate if there's been more research done on that. Because certainly the teenagers would have you believe that late at night is the best time to work, right? That's, yeah. Anything else that anyone saw that they were like, oh, I'm not sure that's true? And they don't have to be.
Well, oh, go ahead, Kim.
No, please.
Well, I was going to say that it was interesting what he said. In order to get cognitive control, and I'm reading my notes from what he, you need to stop thinking one way, kind of like let that imagination go on and let that creativity pile go on, and then start thinking another way in order to be able to maximize your internal processing. In other words, we always thought that in order to be able to make a decision, you need to use the rational component. And it was fascinating to me to know that it's not like that. The example that Rachel gave earlier, it's fascinating to me. My husband always said, when he's working on a project, that it's hard for him, he's having a hard time going to bed. Your mind keeps working on it. And it's not until he falls asleep, subconsciously, he solves the problem. And the next day he can wake up and say, oh, I got it, and writes the answer for whatever the issue is. So when you said, and I connected to the time bed, the teenagers going to bed late and waking up, I believe that that's why it's so important to go to bed, because you're not being rational with your brain when you're asleep. You're unconscious, and therefore your brain is using all its capacity to solve the problem. And it's fascinating that's might be the reason why people say just, you need at least your 8 hours of sleep. It's very important for you to go to bed. So it kind of makes a connection. It's not that we're getting old and we're kind of telling our teenagers in our lives to go to bed because it's important for them. You'll feel better tomorrow. You'll be re-energized. But there is some neurological into it to recognize that, I guess.
Yeah, he also talks about showers as well as a place where people do a lot of resolution.
Wake you up.
There's a maybe that's part of the answer too. So Kim, you were going to say something.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Oh no, please, thank you. This wasn't necessarily a doubt, but more a thought about translating this across settings. And since I come from a healthcare background, I was thinking how this would translate on, a busy intensive care unit, or if you work night shift and, you don't have control of what complex task necessarily comes forward if there's an emergency. So, and especially since my students are often healthcare providers, how that translates, or the the situations in which families are, and they have to do these complex cognitive tasks. So thinking just more, not necessarily doubting, but translating into different settings.
Yeah, well, that's a really good thought. Yeah, I think the solutions he's suggesting are obviously more targeted, I think, towards a sort of a corporate leadership, because that's his client base. So the whole thing about the emails is a very natural place for him to go in terms of that being a disruptor. So I'm gonna close this week's with just once around again, and this is. You know, if it was the thing you mentioned before, that's cool. But if there's one thing that you'd want to point out to someone who doesn't know the book, hasn't read the book, what would it be? And feel free to lead off.
I guess the fact that how he explains that if you can provide the right rewards, that you will get increased performance. And just by, so a much more positive take on how to motivate the workforce that you have, or amongst your family members.
Yeah. I can absolutely see a parallel between the things he describes and the stuff we talked about in the Daniel Pink book, where there's autonomy, purpose, and mastery. Feels there's a definite connection between both of those ideas. What else would we?
To me, it was fascinating to learn the attention. It's a limited resource. So I'm going to tackle my day more thinking about that way. Not just my attention. I usually, as a person, get very easily distracted with things. But also, I have to consider the attention of others and their different personalities. That way I can be more productive emotionally and physically, so with my kids. So I thought it was more time is a limited resource. Once it's gone, but it's fascinating to me to learn that it's not just time, but the attention too.
Yeah. It's weird. When I first read this, I became very conscious of the fact that I could do things first thing in the morning that became challenging, like at 5 and 6 in the evening. Like my thinking was not as clear. And I hope that wasn't just kind of me feeding. It's like I read it, so it must be true, and now I'm experiencing it. I really think I was experiencing it. I do experience it.
I think for me, it feels like a story of hope. It gives explanation to why we think and how we think, and that we can harness it and we can improve and be better. So for me, it's very hopeful because it introduces an aspect of control where I didn't think there was control before. And from the different discussions that we've had around this book, oftentimes when I'm working, I always have more tasks to do from a corporate perspective than I have time to, but I'm more prone to take a complex task and make an initial stab at it at night, go to bed and come back to edit it in the morning. It feels so immensely productive. Where before in the past, I would say, oh, I'll get to this tomorrow. I just can't do it. And so I feel like even just that small recognition that I personally am more productive in that way feels like, what else can I discover about myself that I haven't thought of? And it's a very small change, but it has great rewards. So for me, it's a story of hope.
That's good. Good. I guess the first time I read it, I took the opposite view, which is like, oh boy, how this is terrible. How not rational we are because of the limited capacity for rational thinking. I prefer your perspective. So Kim, what's your message to anyone who hasn't yet come across the book?
Well, I'm going to build on Rachel's discussion of hope, because that's one of the things that I took away as I think about, being an educator, that oftentimes my adult students, and myself included, we might beat ourselves up because our hard work isn't matching the outcome. And this is a way, it's a way to work smarter, not harder, because the drive is there, the hard work is there. It's just fine tuning the approach to it that can either produce a different outcome or produce a different thinking about the outcome and the work, which can be liberating in itself. And I think that's applicable to teenage learners through the lifespan.
That's great. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. There's one additional idea that we didn't mention. There's many ideas in the book that are really worth picking up on, but it's this notion, it talks on multitasking and how that's just not really a very effective thing to do unless you can embed some tasks in, let me get this right, in the basal ganglia, which is the home for repetitive tasks. So the more things that you can identify that as something that you do with familiarity and not requiring much cognitive thought, that it is, I guess, technically possible to multitask, as in driving a car and being able to, I don't know, listen to a podcast at the same time. So that was one of many ideas I think that was super interesting. I'm going to close it there. Thank you for joining us. If you stay till the end, look out for next week's podcast. Subscribe to On and Up Coaching if you can, and you'll see all of the new podcasts come through. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.